Good evening, gamers, and welcome to another exciting interview on the Games with Dave YouTube channel. If you've been watching the past few weeks or so and haven't subscribed, maybe you'd like to, and I'd be really grateful if you did, and drop a like on this video while you're at it. Tonight, for the third time, I am joined by my pal, Trevor Stamper, and I've got to make sure that YouTube is muted on this monitor, which it is. And Trevor very soon is going to be launching Tales from the Smoking Wyrm Volume 10 on Kickstarter. And that is just crazy, my friend.
It is.
It's filled, as always, with great info and aids for judges and players alike. So be sure to click the link in the description. I wish you could click the link in the banner. I just put that there to remind people. But click the link in the description, follow it, and you'll hopefully unlock some more free level 0 character sheets that are going to be, and I'm sure we'll get to see them tonight on a beautiful goldenrod colored.
You won't get to see them tonight.
Paper. Oh, okay, we won't. All right.
Finished. And actually, I just ordered the test goldenrod paper this morning.
Nice.
So, yeah, it is. I'm trying. I have some original D&D character sheets, first edition character sheets from the 70s. And so when the goldenrod, I ordered a couple different colors. When they show up from different publishers, printers, paper makers, I will compare them and find the one that I like that's closest, and then we'll pursue that color. But so goldenrod could have changed over time, and I don't know exactly what paper they use, but we'll try to get close. But you're absolutely right. If you click on the link and sign up to be notified at launch, just doing that increases the number of pages of character sheets I'm giving away for free to everybody who backs within the first 24 hours. So even if you just you just get notified and you don't decide to back, right, then you're still helping push those numbers up. There's a little table. I've posted it on DCC Rocks, the Facebook pit group, and everything. And I'll do a little more advertising because this Kickstarter is going to go live sometime in about 2 weeks, week and a half to 2 weeks, I think. And we're already at 175 people who are going to be notified, which I believe, and I don't actually have the table here for me to stare at, but I think that unlocks 3 character sheets for free. You can get up to 7 if I remember correctly, and everything. So the next big hurdle is getting to 225 people who are to be notified on launch, and that'll get us up to the next tier. And then that carries over into, that sets one pool. And then depending on the number of people who back in the first 24 hours, that'll determine how many extra character sheets we get. And so those will go out to all the first 24-hour backers. And then I also have those character sheets padded into 50 pads, sheet pads, and you'll be able to buy those on the Kickstarter. So this will be.
Yeah. Now, when you say the goldenrod, were those the old Earth System ones that they put out? I think Earth Systems was one of the companies that put them out.
TSR put them out as well, I believe, and yeah, they were that bright yellow but deep mustardy color, right? Yeah, and so like I said, I have some. I inherited some in a collection that I bought that had never been used.
Oh, nice.
And so I have probably 5 or 10 of those, and then I have probably a dozen or so that had been filled out by other people. As I as I bought collections and everything over time, you come across this stuff. So, but yeah, since DCC's motto is gaming like it's 1974, and oddly enough, Goodman Games doesn't currently publish a physical 0 level character sheet. I wanted to fill that niche. A couple of years ago, I created the DCC character folio, which is a booklet just for your character. And we're going to be expanding that next year to include Mutant Crawl Classics. I need to get permission, but probably Weird Frontiers, and then X Crawl Classics. And then also I will ultimately probably do I will do an Earth Crawl one as well. So these will be booklets that once you get your character past first level, then you can transfer them into something that you can really keep track of all the variables in a nice, consistent manner. So, yeah. But you got to go back and you got to have that 0 level character sheet too. And you can publish them, you can print them off of Purple Sorcerer and have them pre-generated and everything. But I just spent the summer, spring and summer, generating about 400 Earthcrawl, which is my my upcoming kind of setting. Earthcrawl characters, 0 level characters, and there is nothing like rolling up those stats, writing them down, and going through the variables and everything, and having your own custom filled out sheets. And besides, you can take this pad with you, throw it down in front of your group, have them tear off as many as they need, and get going with it. So yeah,
just let them know they might be using all 50 of them. And
that's part of the beauty of it, right? And so these are slightly oversized to what you find like on Purple Sorcerer. They're like gosh, I wrote the dimensions down because I was working on some layout stuff the other day, and they're essentially just short of 7 inches, 6.5 inches wide, and then they're about 4.25 inches tall. So they're a beefy little characters book sheet.
Nice
for a 0 level, because when I play 0 levels, I make notes on the characters. There's a big note section and everything. I've always found that there's not enough room, and so I wanted something a little bit bigger, a little bit better to track things and stuff. So yeah,
and it'll fit perfectly inside the zines.
Oh, absolutely. Make a perfect bookmark, right? And so you could use it as a bookmark for your character folio. And I'm kind of shooting myself because I don't have one sitting here, but oh well.
I know mine is just out of arm's, well, a little more than just out of arm's reach, but I can't grab mine right off either. So
yeah. We've done a lot of play testing with those character booklets, the folios, and they work great. There are some things I'll be changing in the next iteration of it. So, but by and large, I'm really happy with it. And anybody who uses them, they love them. So, yeah, that's and you can get them now through distribution. So you can pick up the character folios in your friendly local gaming store. I think you can get them on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all these places. Goodman Games is distributing them for us. So
that's awesome.
Yep. Very cool. So
I just lost my train of thought because I was going to say something else silly, and now I don't remember what it was. I know what I was going to say. I actually have some of those golden character sheets as well that were my brother's.
There you go.
When we were growing up together, and like he had his filled out, the little picture of Princess Goldmoon drawn in there, and going back and looking at it, I always thought it was so cool. I'm like, wait a minute, Princess Goldmoon. That wasn't an original character, to him. But before we dig into issue 10, the one thing I wanted to bring up was see if you could give us an update on the Tentacular Nest Generator. And also, if you could give a little background on it for folks that may be new to Tales from the Smoking Wyrm.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So in issue 3 of Tales from the Smoking Wyrm, we introduced a creature called the Tentacular. The Tentacular is kind of our idea of a beholder, but it's in cat form, and instead of legs, the cats have tentacles and they float, and so they have 5 tentacles. They're 4 legs, and their tail are tentacles, and then they have like an octopus beak in the center of their mouth or their stomach, and they actually use that beak to pierce the bodies of mortals and literally draw their soul out. They mature by consuming the souls of wizards, and so they're an absolutely bizarre creature, but they're also really intelligent and playful. And the male tentaculars are the ones who rear the young, and female tentaculars go off to other dimensions through other things that we haven't disclosed yet. And so one of the things that male tentaculars do when they have a brood of young is they build a nest. And so in issue 6, we had mentioned this in issue 3, but we hadn't really followed up on it. And in issue 6, we followed up with that with a tentacular nest. And do I have a copy of issue 6 here? I do. So with this issue right here, we talked about the tentacular nest, and there's a huge article in here with a way to basically procedurally generate your nest. And we even had a handout which was this is actually figure 3, was something you could pull out of the book and run with. And it includes essentially a full nest of the tentacular known as Galaxian Wizard Hater. And so you can see here, let me just see if I can line it up. This is a little nest. It's got 6 places, and you can see it looks like a schematic. There are different tunnels connecting these nests. All of this is procedurally generated, right? And so we tested it. Actually, my buddy Larry Cosentino tested this for me, because I asked my good friends to test things and see if they can find flaws in the system, which they did before we published it. And Larry went to the effort of actually not just testing it, but programming it in rough code, just to show me just to find any flaws. He found none. At that point, we had kind of perfected it. And so he went through and gave all the if-then statements and everything and generated nests of different sizes. Of course, if you think of a room as kind of a 6-sided structure, like a cube, right? Since Tentacular can levitate, they can go up through the ceilings and down through the floors. And so you could have tunnel entrances on any surface connecting to any other surface in another room and everything. And so if you work through the procedure that I set up, you will generate a tentacular nest. And it randomizes that, whether it's a really young tentacular or a really old tentacular. And there's a couple other variables that I'm not going to talk about. But you can generate this nest and the tunnels. And what male tentaculars do is they go find adventuring parties, right? They abduct the adventuring parties, drop them into their nests, and let the young hunt them to perfect their hunting skills.
That's just horrifying.
It is horrifying. And so you basically, you get captured, and then you wake up and you're either in a tunnel or you're in a room, and the nests are really, they generate the purpose of the rooms. So is this a sleeping chamber, or is it a brooding chamber with unhatched tentaculars, or is it a research chamber, or is it they have chambers that are specifically designed for the rituals, the rites of passage of destroying the souls of wizards and everything. All of that is kind of detailed. There's a lot there. This is a kind of a cool adversary to come up against, and it is it is essentially just there are traps, there are trophy displays, all this stuff that is procedurally generated. So you randomly generate a dungeon, drop your characters in it, and then the offspring try to kill the party. That's the point. And so it's just a grindhouse, right? And everything. And so it's a lot of fun to play. Tentaculars, each of their eyes have 3 levels of power. So tentaculars have the 2 cat eyes, and then they have extra eyes in their faces. I don't think I've got a head here you can easily see. And I don't have a copy of issue 3 right here on my shelf, which has a great tentacular face. But anyway, so they have multiple eyes, right? And everything. And so each of those eyes can either have a minor power or a major power. And each of those powers have 3 levels, depending on how many times you've randomly generated it. Because you randomly generate a tentacular, just like you generate a dragon, right? And everything. So there's a lot to do, and obviously that takes a bit of time. And so one of the things that we got to thinking about was, it'd be great if we could actually just release these nodes so that you could click a button and generate an entire dungeon, including the tentaculars, right? Of course, that said, there is absolutely nothing better than sitting down with a piece of paper and working all this out. And as a matter of fact, I have a whiteboard in my main gaming room, an 8-foot by 4-foot whiteboard, and I have magnetized nest rooms, so I can just smack them on the table, and then I can draw the tunnels, and then there are events randomly associated across the tunnels and everything and stuff. So this is it's just a way to have fun and procedurally generate a dungeon. When we launched the Kickstarter for 6, we also got about 50 or 60 people supported us to help us generate. Well, the purpose of that was to actually buy the hard drive system we needed to really centralize all of our files. and everything. But the reward for that was that we were going to generate this tentacular nest online generator, and we have done it twice now, right? 2 times, but we have run across some problems with initially with the way WordPress was designed. We have worked through all those, and the real hiccup at this point is we can generate the nest, we can generate the hex grid, the hexes, we can show you what wall of the hex a tunnel comes out of and what wall of another hex they come into, right? A room. But we can't, there's no rules for procedure generating how those tunnels actually overlap each other and stuff, and whether when they overlap do they actually intersect or are they independent. That was actually something that we realized in hindsight that I hadn't written, because I had just kind of given some very loose rules that work for paper, but they don't work for a computer to generate something like that. And so we're still working through this thing, trying to figure out, can we visualize the whole thing? We can certainly tell you this room leads, this tunnel is the entrance for tunnel 2, and this is the exit for tunnel 2. That's all easily demonstrable on the paper. And then procedurally generate all of the random items that are in the rooms and in the tunnels, and all the baby tentaculars and all, the adult tentacular and all that stuff. All that's now possible. It's just getting it into a format that works. And so that's where I'm at with that. It's a process. Unfortunately, I'm not a programmer, and so that process is also dependent on other people who are slowly programming through these problems and communicating them to me when we get a chance and everything. So it will happen. I'm looking
Yeah,
forward.
you'll get there.
Right. And it'll be great. I mean, it'll be really cool.
Oh, I can't wait.
Part of the other thing is, we set up a membership. So you log in, you create an account, and I believe we're moving towards you being able to generate tentacular nests, download that code, right? So, because it's just a string of numbers, download that code and save that file, come back to it later, log back in and load that code back up, and then make changes to it and download that code again.
So cool.
And so there's a lot of moving pieces. It turns out I probably should have started with something simple like, class creation, making a beast or something. That's super simple. The rest of this is much more complex. But the cool thing is that Goodman Games has this dungeon alphabet. And we got permission from Goodman Games to include table references to the dungeon alphabet in issue 6. So you'll come to a thing and it'll say randomly roll on this table to generate, some random items or something. But we also got permission to actually include those tables in the random generator.
Oh, nice.
So it will generate all that for you and then give you a web link that says, like what you see, go buy this in PDF or whatever, or from goodmangames.com. And so it'll actually link you to Goodman Games as a form of advertising. That's our response, that's our due diligence. And
nice.
So it is coming. It is a slow process, and I probably need to send it out an update, and I've just been negligent on that. So,
I wouldn't say negligent. I mean, you got a lot going on. I mean,
you've
made it to volume 10.
Volume 10. I think this is our 14th or 15th item we published. So yeah.
Between these and the monographs and
right. And the monographs are becoming increasingly complicated to produce because we're attempting to do things that no other publisher does with adventures. And so that's all virgin ground, right? It's you're walking in a field that nobody's ever been to, and you're trying to figure out, how do I design this so it's elegant, so it works, and everything. And the early playtest responses we've gotten from the things we are building are incredibly positive. So
nice.
So I have no doubt that we will get there. Yeah, there's a lot going on.
So how does it feel to hit volume 10? I mean,
it's kind of weird.
Yeah, I bet. And
when we first presented issue 1 to Joseph Goodman, I don't think I've ever told this story. He said, "This is great." He's like, "I love this." He's like, "But maybe you should cut it in half." He's like, you're going to run out of material. You're going to burn out in like 2 or 3 issues, and that'll be it. And it kind of seems like you could do this long term. And I said, well, okay. After issue 1, we went back and I said, all right, we'll put a hard limit of 48 pages on an issue. And we've never achieved that, meaning we have always been close to 56 or 60 pages. And I have many more issues laid out or in manuscript format and everything. So there's just tons to do. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you've interwoven so many items that you're able to harken back to.
Yes.
And still can build upon, which is fantastic. One of the things being I've got to look here in my notes so I don't get it wrong, was the King of Beasts. You went back to
issue
2 with issue 10.
Yes, issue 10. Issue 10 revisits issue 2 and issue 4. So we have articles that reference previous issues all the time. That's actually a kind of a standard thing we do, because we keep getting reviews where people are like, this material is great, but I want to know more about how to use it. And so that generates ideas on how we can provide more cool things to help people learn to use things. So the King of Beasts is the patron for issue 2. And in issue 10, we are presenting 7 patron missions. Now, the patron missions series has been going on now for
5
issues. This will be the 5th installment of patron missions. As a matter of fact, issue 10 has 2 sets of patron missions because I got tired of pushing the King of Beasts back and back and back as we created new patrons. And so I was like, I'm just going to put them in here. So issue 5 we came up with patron missions Dornivis in a response to a critique by Nick Barron, who said, I love Dornivis from issue 3, but I need to know more how to use him. Again, the same type of thing. Actually, Pookie also just reviewed issue 3 and had the exact same response. This is really awesome. It has tons of flavor, but I don't know how to use them. And patron missions is a way to use patrons, right? If you read the patron section in DCC, it's very clearly stated in the first couple sentences that patronage is a quid pro quo between a supernatural entity and the player, meaning the player can call upon the supernatural patron, gain power in the form of spells and invoke patron and stuff like this, and other benefits they might get. And the patron then turns around and says, now that I've done that for you, you need to do something for me. But they never talk about what that something should be. As a matter of fact, what they do is they leave it up to you as the judge to develop those kind of side quests and stuff. And so when the complaint came out that Dornivis was really cool, but they needed to know how to use them. And we had stated that Dornivis was very active as a patron, right? We came up with this idea of patron missions. And so this is now the 6th installment of those articles. And each issue has a different patron. We're trying to get caught up with past ones. And then as we develop a new patron, we also try and include the patron missions for that patron in the same issue, because we know that at a certain level, people become kind of overwhelmed with all of our interweaving of stuff, right? And it's not intentional. It's just that one good idea leads to the next good idea, which leads to the next good idea.
Right.
So there's a King of Beasts patron, 7 patron missions for the King of Beasts, and 7 patron missions for our new patron in issue 10, who is Mimir, which harkens back to Scandinavian and Norse mythology. He is the giant that stands at the foot of Yggdrasil, the world tree, and he is a patron of trolls. And trolls we wrote up as a character class in issue 4. And for a long time, once issue 4 was such a success, we've had so many good responses from people about how much they love this troll class. It's really balanced. Even though they get tons of abilities and stuff, there's also lots of negatives. You're creating a very dynamic character that you have to balance these things. And so, but they want more, and so we have a list of about 4 or 5 patrons we'll probably develop for trolls, all based on Scandinavian and Norse mythology. And
So
so,
cool.
yeah, and then those will all come with patron missions, and then the new patron thing we're rolling out, I think with issue 11 or 12, is patron locations. And so patron locales are patron specific. This is a special place that this patron either controls or has built, or it's a place of refuge for the patron's worshipers, adherents and everything and stuff. And so those will be very flavorful locations, kind of almost like little mini dungeons, but they have a very specific purpose, and they're designed for you. If you're raiding, you want to steal, the judge can say, oh, I need you to steal something from Dornivis, and I'll put it here in this patron location, and you have to go steal it. Or as a patron, as an adherent, you may go, I need to make a pilgrimage to a special location, a place of power, right? Which is something else that DCC talks about, places of power.
Yep.
Giving you benefits in spell casting. And so these are places of power. And so, yeah, so we have created this underground layer that is the layer of Dornivis, and it has the potential to unlock new cool things for those characters, whether they're stealing from it or visiting it for power, for their own sake, as a fellow adherent of it. So that's all coming too. Eventually, we'll probably end up making a book of patrons. I don't know how that's going to work yet, but it's something we've considered.
Well, I can't wait until you do, because I'll be there for it.
Yeah. It would have, I think a book of patrons would have the patron, it would have the patron missions, it would have the patron locale. I think it would have enemies of the patron. So bad guys that you can use if you're going to use that patron in a central war or something, you're going to need to make these things living parts of your campaign. And then also probably a magic item or two of the patron. And then finally an NPC kind of, how the back of the DCC RPG has the of men section.
Yes.
We would probably do something like that for each patron. So of Dornivis, right? And then it would have some elementals, but also it would have wizards who are who are adherents of or Dornivis at multiple levels. So you just have those pre-generated as NPCs, and you could be throwing them out there and stuff. Yeah. So
cool.
I think there's a lot you can do with that. And then eventually we will, in a year or two, probably start moving into gods and everything as well. So I got a whole bunch of ideas for deities and all the types of things that you can build off of deities, but we're having a lot of fun with patrons. So we seem to be on a roll with that.
So do you have like a board with red string going everywhere so you don't lose track of any of this stuff, or how?
What I have. So what we do is there is a word count threshold for each issue of Tales from the Smoking Wyrm. That's the initial pass. It's between 14 and 16,000 words, depending on the articles, on how they lay out. That is an issue. And so that gets me into the rough ballpark, right? And so I track all that on a spreadsheet with all the titles of the things and who's authoring it and have I paid them yet and all these other factors. And obviously word count is the most important of those. And so I'm counting up words as we iteratively work through these projects. Every time I do an edit pass on an article or I write on an article, I update the word count in the spreadsheet. So I can almost in real time look at those and say, that's an issue that's almost full, right? Or that's an issue that's almost full, or that's now over. I need to move some stuff out of here. And we always start with way more than we can actually write, or than we'll actually put into an issue, because invariably I write longer than I think I can. Things kind of swell, and I'm not one, since it's me, and I'm not beholden to a 10,000 word limit or something like the average Goodman Games module. And I can say, yeah, we can push that boundary. I'll just move stuff around. And so, yeah, so that's the first level. And then I have a whole bunch of articles that I've written, or 3/4 of the way written, and they sit in an undecided category folder. And then I have those just listed with their current word counts. And so as I am, there's a phase of publishing, which an issue like a publication like Smoking Wyrm, where you're thinking about what's going to go well together, what makes a well-rounded issue, and you're plotting those things out. And so having all that in a spreadsheet makes it doable. It allows you to keep track of it. And then you're right, there are lots of handwritten notes as I'm thinking about things, or notes in the marginalia of my notebooks and stuff, that then I have to go back and find and interrelate, so on and so forth. So it's complicated.
I would lose track. There's no question. I would be completely lost by like issue 3.
Yeah. It's a skill. It's a skill. And I started as an academic. I've designed courses for hundreds and hundreds of students that are incredibly complicated and interwoven, and where the payoff is not readily apparent until you're at the end of the semester, or sometimes in the second class or the third class, because they're built in series. And yep. So those types of design skills really serve me well here, where I'm like, okay, so I need to teach this, and I need to teach you that, and then I need to teach you that. And that's the same thing as I need to write this initial thing. And even though I'm going to lay into it some stuff that connects to the next thing or the third thing, because I know that's coming and everything. You can't fit everything in every issue, right? There's a limit. There's a physical limit to what I can put in an issue. So it's not fair to sit there and say, oh my gosh, you didn't get everything for this patron that you could ever have in this one issue. All that takes time. It takes planning. And that time is really helpful, because time depth equals iterative reflection depth. The more time I have to reflect on something, invariably, the better it is. And so I don't, only once or twice in all the issues we've done have I ever said, this article must go in this issue. And it must be written now. And I got to push, we got to push it. Most of the time, that is not the top thing. And that causes problems too, because on another level, you are also balancing financials. And so, like, we have patron missions written for every patron in the DCC core rulebook almost. They're just waiting. They're sitting there layered into that spreadsheet, waiting to be executed, right? And like we did Bills in issue 8, and stuff like this. So we've started to do these. We'd gotten permission from Joseph Goodman to do these types of things with his patrons, because they don't step on his patrons' toes. They enhance the patron. Right. And he's seen that we can build these really nice, and these are good missions, right? I mean, they're especially the Mimir ones. When I usually don't write patron missions. I have an author. His name is Jose F. Cardoza, and Cardoso, and he has written all of them except one, I think.
Wow.
And it's just, he's good. You find people who have a very specific skill sometimes, and you're like, this is amazing, right? And so he and I developed a consulting language, and really took off. And they're very creative. They're very different, each of the little missions. If you ever get a chance, a reader should look at them. They're all different, and everything, and they do different things. And so, and here's an example of what they look like. They're just like a paragraph, right? They're not a complete thing. They're a sketch of what you have to do. Here's this, this one is, let's look at it. It's Lash and Scourge. This is for Krampus. It's out of issue 9. And then the Dunkel Bartle desires to punish a den of wickedness and vice that is in the party's path, preferably when they are seeking rest. And this is a conversation with the judge, so the players don't know this. The location is a tavern where craven and pitiable creatures gather as if moths to a flame. Krampus desires to inflict a night of terror on them. If the adherent can convince their allies to assist them, after a 1-hour ritual to the dark he-goat, each party member gains 2d3 patron taints as a benefit, right? These taints will disappear at first light and should be used to scare the tavern's patrons. Unbeknownst to the party, Krampus's revenge comes the attention of the village's deity. After D4 rounds of scouring the tavern, the local friar and we give you a page reference to pull up the Friar from the DCC RPG, and 2d3 acolytes, again giving reference, show up to banish the demons. The party can escape, but they must successfully intimidate most patrons in the tavern before doing so. And there's a random qualifier for that. You need to have so many people intimidated to succeed at the mission, right? And if you fail at the mission, Krampus is not going to be happy with you. And so that's a low stakes mission. Some of these things are incredibly high stakes. Some of these things lead to serious rewards for players if they can pull it off, but they're very dangerous. And so, but they're all meant to be little side quests. You're on your normal adventure, right? That's what it said. You're off going somewhere. And by the way, you're gonna take a segue to this tavern and scare the shit out of some people.
I love the adaptation of the quest for it thing with the patron missions.
And that's exactly it. It's quest for it, right? And so maybe the adherent asks the patron, "Oh, I need this," right? And the patron says, "Yeah, I can do that for you, but you got to do this for me." And that's what patron
shit out of a bunch of people.
Yeah, go do this thing, right? And then I'll help you. And so in a convention game, those things are not possible. And so since DCC is so widely recognized as a good convention game, many people don't think about the fact that it's actually a great campaign game. And so, think of Tales from the Smoking Wyrm as your guide, as your assistant in developing campaigns, right?
That's a great way of putting it.
Almost everything we do is designed to give you depth to the characters, depth to their patrons, depth to, everything. It's designed to help you build and flesh out your game to make it more deep. And so I was just reading, like I said, Pookie just reviewed issues 1 through 3 over the past year, and he keeps coming back to this topic of this stuff is great, but it takes effort on your part. This is not a plunk down thing. Now it could be, right? I mean, you could read that paragraph in a couple seconds and just execute it. But there are a lot of things that require some time. If you're gonna run a tentacular murder dungeon, you're gonna need a couple hours of work to get all that generated,
right,
and everything. So but it'll generate it for you. It'll tell you where the tentacular dumps the characters, and and then you just let them run around scared. So yeah, that's
the beauty of OSR gaming. Is it?
Excuse me. Yeah, absolutely.
Is the effort that's required to make it awesome?
Yeah. Right. We don't give you every tool, but we are giving you some tools. Mainly what we're providing is inspiration, and then some mechanics to help you leverage that inspiration.
So you mentioned adding depth a few minutes ago, and one thing that you're really adding some depth with in issue 10 that blows my mind is 100 new occupations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how have you come up with that, and that many, and what were a couple of your favorites to add to the occupations? Jeez, I completely lost my train of thought there for a second.
No worries. Just quickly, Brian Spellman, great to see you're following. And yeah, Rush, you just got to represent.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. So the interesting thing about that article is I didn't write it. My good friend Brian Gilkison wrote that, and Brian, this is actually the second time he's written articles for Tales of the Smoking Wyrm that deal with occupations. I cannot remember which issue we dealt with them previously, where we're like, occupations are for any race or class, but we've done that previously already. And my understanding is that Brian came across something frustrating in the original occupation table. This is I'm kind of paraphrasing from memory what he had told me about this, and I may be wrong. It may be apocryphal, but hopefully not. Brian had run across something that he was unhappy with in the initial table, and he was like, "Well, we need more depth." And so he sat down and did research for weeks and weeks and weeks, looking for all the different types of medieval or kind of 12th century to 16th century occupation names that there are, and realized that the Goodman Games list of 100 is great, but it's actually very incomplete. I think in the end he came up with over 400 or 500 different occupations,
Wow.
and so he has summarized those into 100 that he really liked, and everything. And so the idea is you roll a control die, if I remember correctly, and you roll your percentile, and the control die either sends you to the first 100 in the main rules or the second 100 in the DCC book, and and then he has some even further expansion for things, like I think he's got like 30 or 40 different types of farmer, right? So that you're not just the 7 or whatever that are in the main rule book.
Right.
Yeah. But I think
Crazy.
that talks to the idea that there are far more occupations in general life than you can ever imagine, right? That there are lots of jobs, even in modern settings, that we just don't
Yeah.
even know exist, but we can't live without. And you don't even know you can't live without them, right? And so I think that's a really interesting thing to then delve into deeper. Is here's a whole bunch of medieval occupations, some of which just got left off, but they're pretty common, and some of which are really what we would consider to be kind of esoteric or obtuse, hard to know about, but they're there. You know, you're not just a bower and a fletcher. There's a bower. There's a fletcher. There is a arrowhead maker that it's all they do is make arrowheads. There is somebody who only makes the shaft of the fletching,
Yep.
and there's somebody who does the fletching. That's actually 3 jobs that we usually concatenate into one,
For one, yeah.
because we don't really think about how hard it is, because we just don't do it in modern setting for the most part. But in a medieval setting, in our historical background, arrows were a very important commodity. And so they talk about these battles, like the Battle of Agincourt and things like this, where they're like, well, they let fly 100,000 arrows.
Blotted out the sun.
Yeah, it blotted out the sun. And you're like, well, how do you build 100,000 arrows? Well, it takes a lot of effort, right? And it takes people having very specialized skills to do that. And so that's really cool. I find that there's a lot of neat things you can do with occupations, especially if you're, and so having different occupations allows you to have different characters, because, and this is what's interesting about Dungeon Crawl Classics, the occupation is not just a background thing that is forgotten. The occupation stays with the character throughout their entire travel. It is the thing that determines whether you have a D20 on a skill or a D10.
Right.
And so the occupation you randomly generate at 0 level is an incredibly important piece of information that carries with you through all of your classes. It informs you what you're really good at and what you're not really good at beyond adventuring.
Yeah, I could imagine like having a Fletcher in your group is going to be a very valuable asset going through your adventure, of
Yeah.
like, oh no, I'm out of arrows. I can make the shaft and I've got 10 arrowheads. Shoot. Oh, well, I can make your fletching. So
That's right. Yeah. So, or you go into a town, and you don't have any copper, right? Well, I'm a Fletcher. I've got a job, right? I know exactly how to survive.
right.
These people are very resilient people beyond their character classes. And I think having that occupation and exploring them in detail is something that is really cool. At one point I spoke with Joseph Goodman about the idea of redoing character classes completely from scratch. The idea was to move towards something more akin to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, first edition, where you had very short classes that had exit strategies into other classes. And the idea was that all those classes would just be the occupations. I would just simply write up 100 or 200 classes that exited into each other, right? And you would kind of organically travel through these classes as you went. And we would just absorb all of the special abilities of warriors and wizards and everything into those specialized micro occupations.
That would be really cool.
It would radically change the way the game is played.
Yeah, it would.
I mean, I think it would be a lot of fun. And I started it. I haven't finished it. It's been languishing while I work on other projects. So
well, issue 12, we'll see some of it maybe.
maybe.
So
Although
as you know, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say issue 12 is pretty written at this point. So yeah.
Yeah, you're usually 2 to 3 issues ahead.
Well,
of-
I don't know if you noticed. This is the only issue. Issue 10 is the only issue we're releasing truly this year. It's the only new Kickstarter that I have so far.
right.
Right, and the reason for that is I had a death in the family, and um, and and I've been dealing with the fallout from that, and having to take care of things for that estate. It's been taking a lot of my time, and stuff. And so, I'm really primarily a caregiver, and I was a caregiver for this person who passed away. And then this publishing stuff is like my side gig, right? Because it's super flexible, allows me to adapt to whatever's happening at a moment. So that has, I mean, we had planned in January, I think November, when we sat down and plotted out 2024, we would have been on our 5th or 6th Kickstarter that right now. So I have
Crazy.
a huge backlog of material that is just chomping at the bit to get out, that we're currently behind on. So.
Well, 2025. First, I'm very sorry for your loss.
Oh, thank you.
And secondly, 2025 is going to be the deluge from Blind Visionary Publications. Watch out, folks.
One can
The
only hope.
floodgates shall open.
Let's hope.
So one thing I'm sure you know from our other talks is one of my favorite sections in Tales from the Smoking Wyrm. I think I was born to be a druid or an herbalist or something, is Culpepper's Herbal.
Yeah.
And what new plants can we expect to see covered in volume 10?
Oh my gosh. I can't remember.
I can tell you because I've scoured it and I saw it.
Is it on the Kickstarter somewhere?
It is. Yep.
I probably said it. It's like, is it like beet?
It was beets, and now, geez, I'm gonna have to pull it right up and look here again real quick.
Beets. And
I can't remember.
See, sometimes
I wipe my memory before I do any of these because I always look at stuff and then I'm like, well, I don't want to fully remember it because where'd it go? Where'd it go? Culpepper's Herbal. Where are you hiding on me? Here we go. Focus on herb, beets, betony, and possibly the leaves of Ysidril itself.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Because we have Mimir in there. And one of the this is an interesting feedback story. When Jose writes the patron missions, he and I interact and layer in lots of subplots and lots of connections. For instance, if you go back and look at these patron missions, we've now named about 5 other elemental patrons that are all on my list of things to produce, right? Because the idea was there's supposed to be 5 archimentals for each element. And so we have been subtly, kind of slowly building out that pantheon of archimentals. And then one of the things that Jose did when he was writing the patron missions for Mimir was he put down the leaves of Yggdrasil as a potent herb, right? He just put it out there as a throwaway line in one of the missions. And I was like, well, if we're going to do that, I should probably write that. And as a matter of fact, that's the only thing that isn't currently written for issue 10. So, I mean, it's not hard. They're only about 400 or 500 words each most of the time. I will get down there and write Yggdrasil, and we'll put it in there because I'm like, if I'm going to mention it, it'd be cool if it was in the same one, even though it's a Y and I'm currently in the B's. Sometimes it's just kind of nice to jump around. So,
and like you said, it fits so well with Mimir being at the base of the world tree.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why in issue 9, we put in more holiday themed herbal, right? So there was holly and ivy and mistletoe. Well, I'm certainly not in the I's, H's, or M's, but they just made sense. And so we have a general progression. I do about a third of any given alphabet of the herbs that I ultimately want to do. And then we move forward to the next letter. But sometimes I scatter in other things. And you might actually, Culpepper has been really successful. I have to say, I do it because I just like plants. It's kind of cool. And it was my, I draw all the Culpeppers art. I do all the art for that one.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and so
That I didn't know.
yeah, I don't think I've ever told anybody. It lists me as an artist on the front page, but I don't tell you what pages people do art on. And so, so I have this big sketchbook, which normally is sitting here at my feet.
And I'll even show folks here from this issue.
Yeah. Or I was really proud of some of these leaves here in the ivy.
Nice.
Holly, and then ivy came out really good. Look at that. So, and then we highlighted mistletoe. It's got a whole page.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm getting much better. But that's what's neat is I'm getting much better. I've learned a lot about doing art and the type of styluses to use and markers to use and things like this to get the type of effect that I'm looking for. And so so you might actually see Culpeper showing up in other people's publications because
very cool.
Because I've been invited to do a couple for other people. So
that's awesome.
And then originally I was going to do a Culpeper's Patreon where the idea was that like once a week I would write on Monday I would write the herb, publish it on Monday, and then the following week I would have the illustration done, and then so you would accumulate about 26 of these a year, with the idea that then I would release those every year or so in a special, like here's the A's, here's the B's, here's the C's, and you'd have a little encyclopedia of herbs.
So cool.
Wouldn't that be cool? That would be so.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate dream for Culpeppers is this super detailed herbal, and then tables to cross-reference some things. Oh, you're having a problem with werewolves. Here are the herbs that you need, right?
Right.
And stuff like that. And so, there's some neat stuff to do there, and everything.
You got to do it.
I got to do it. I will get to it. So
before I change direction of the conversation, because we touched on something at the beginning, another project of yours, but one thing that we haven't touched on yet for volume 10 is the alternate DCC skill system, which you're introducing. And what can you tell me about that?
So I have the current skill system in 20 seconds. You're skilled in something, you roll a D20 base. You're unskilled in something, you roll a D10 base. That's it, right? A couple years ago, we introduced, I think it was in issue 6, maybe it was issue 6 or maybe 7. We introduced the idea of coordination between players, whereas up to 2 players could assist a player in a die roll, a skill check. And so you could say, oh, I'm trying to research this. And 2 players would be like, oh, I know that too. I'll chip in. They'd roll a D20, and on a 10 or higher, they would bump your die by 1, right?
Oh, so it'd bump you up 1 in the chain.
It'd bump you up 1 in the chain. And that was our initial, exposure to using a dice chain more fully in skills. And we really like it. As a matter of fact, it's just a standard rule at my table. And anytime I run at a con, I mention it to players, and you can see them beginning to work as a team by when someone's like, faced with something that's problematic, another player like, I'll assist, and they'll roll, and okay, you got a die bump. If you roll a natural 1 on that, by the way, it's a negative die bump. So,
oh no.
So it does have potential bad outputs, right? So that was it. But there's a lot more die in the die chain. And there's a lot of space between 10 and 20. And so one of the things we wanted to do was introduce a way to use skills in groups, sort of like synergy, which is a 3rd edition concept. 2 skills were related. They could be used they would grant each other bonuses to an ultimate skill check. But instead of bonuses, you would move up and down the dice chain. And so the idea is that there are kind of 9. Well, DCC also includes something other than skills called proficiencies. All weapons are proficiencies, by the way. They're specifically named that. They're not a skill. It's a weapon proficiency, and you
Right.
have weapon proficiency in a certain weapon. That's the skill, is the weapon. That's why you roll a d20. You could also think of it as you could turn DCC into a skill-based game very easily this way, right?
Yep.
And so we wanted to create a skill system that was incredibly flexible and incredibly personalizable, so that you were not limited to massive numbers of tables of skills with special rules and all that. We didn't want to have that. Not that I'm not in favor of that for some games, but it doesn't feel very DCC-ish. And so we created 9 proficiencies. They're loosely based off of university colleges: College of Ag, College of Science, College of Arts, College of Engineering. We added a College of War, so a proficiency of war, which is where all your weapon proficiencies sit, and things like this. And we said, okay, so the player gets to identify their skills. When they identify them, they can say, this is a skill I identify with engineering, right? Let's give you an example. Let's say I'm a carrot farmer and I need to make a farming check, right? But it's not about carrots. Well, I could kind of come at carrot farming many different ways. If I was a hydroponics expert, right, that might be science-based carrot farming, because I have to think about all the pHs and all this stuff, and I'm all the trace minerals and the water and roots, and maybe I need to like add some fish in there, so I've got aquaculture and I'm moving these systems back and forth and everything. That's science or engineering based. You could put your skill in either one of those categories. But if you're just a farmer and all you do is go out there and throw some seeds in the ground, that's agriculture, right? Those same types of things, but you're coming at it from a different direction. Or you could be just a gardener. You got a house and you got a garden and you love growing prize carrots and cross hybridizing them, and you really consider that to be an art form, right? And so all of those that I've just mentioned are different proficiency categories. So you could put your carrot farming wherever you want. And then that influences other things within that sphere of the proficiency. So the idea is for every 3 skills you have categorized under a proficiency, you have a 1 die bump up the die chain.
Cool.
Right. And so then, we use this really a lot in Earthcrawl, the setting that I've been designing, where it's very skill based. People are highly skilled. They have sometimes dozens of skills. And they choose, first of all, the player chooses the name of the skill. I don't care what it is. There's no limits. If you want to be an expert in brushing the root hairs of carrots and you want to be a carrot root hair brusher, that's the skill. Well, that's what you're rolling your D20 on, right? But then, that's still like an ag thing or an art thing or wherever you place it. Whenever you get a couple more skills in that proficiency, then all non-skilled checks under the proficiency go up a die, just because you have extra knowledge in that area. So it's really flexible. It's very DCC. It actually has a lower word count than the actual chapter on skills. Right? It's only like 1,100 words, and it radically changes the way you play the game.
That does, because of the way it groups everything.
Because the way it groups things
alters the dice chain, and
yep, people start thinking like that, and it helps them. And what I do is I tell them, you don't have to spend all your skills in advance because you don't really know who your character is, like a 0 level character, and so you can spend them as you go, and everything. And so you don't have to have anything identified before you start. And then you could say, oh, I need to have a D12 on this, right? Or a D20. And you could say, oh, I have this skill, by the way, write it down. Okay, now I have this skill, write that down. And you're kind of narratively defining your character as you go through the system. And so what I find is it gives players a lot of agency. It allows them to define their character in ways that DCC otherwise doesn't define characters. And it makes for great storytelling at the table, and it's another currency that players can play with.
So cool. I love how it just enriches everything.
Yeah, that's the job. And so it's a very basic thing, but I find that it works great. I don't use it at every game, but we use it. We're in active playtesting in Earthcrawl, and we definitely use it. So,
well, you keep setting up the bowling pins for me perfectly here tonight, because the next thing I wanted to touch on was Earthcrawl. Because I feel like, except for Piety, I think we covered everything with
all the big ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just tonight, I subscribed to the Earthcrawl Patreon.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. How that had slipped under my nose is beyond me. I just didn't know it was there until a little bird told me, I won't say who, about the Earthcrawl. And he goes, you got to ask him about Earthcrawl. And I'm like, all right, I'll ask him about Earthcrawl. And I looked it up and I'm like, oh my God, a math magician and stuff like this. And I'm like, this is so cool. But for like me just jumping on and other folks out there that may just be learning about it, I'm going to pop this up real quick from Brian. So many people decry non-5e games because the characters have no depth, because they don't have feats, etc. They have no idea what they're missing. He is absolutely right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Brian.
And I love it too. But yeah, I can't believe I missed this, and like the math magician, everything. But for folks like me just hopping on, and those that may not be aware of it yet, can you explain what Earthcrawl is?
So I'll tell you something about this. I'm gonna lead in with a story that I've never told anybody else.
Except I'm getting all the good stories tonight.
All the good stories. I had a concept for a setting that was pretty near and dear to my heart, and I worked on it for about a year, about 2 years ago, and then I got quite a ways into it, and I was like, you know what? I am not good enough at writing settings and detailing them to do this setting. This is advanced. This is really advanced. There's a lot of moving things in here. So I'm going to shelve that setting, sit it off to the side. I mean, I was like 100,000 words into it, tons of classes and shipbuilding rules, and there were airships and different levels of the atmosphere and hundreds of creatures. And I was really working on this. And it was a very productive, like 2 or 3 months that I had worked on this. And I'm like, this is more than I'm getting too attached to it. I'm like, I'm going to shelve it. I'm going to come up with a different thing to learn how to build settings. And I've been running my own home campaign world and everything for years. All I run are campaigns, to be honest. I almost never run short form games. We're 3 years into a Lankmar campaign. We put our 3 or 4 year campaign of DCC Standard on hold to play Lankmar. Those characters are sitting at 5th and 6th level. Now the Lankmar characters at 5th and 6th level, and everything. So I play a lot of campaigns, and I believe in settings are useful. So I sat down and I said, what's another setting I'd like to do? And I had an idea for this science fact setting, not a science fiction setting, science fact. I'll explain what the difference between that is in a second. And I'm like, well, this will be a good test case. I'm like, this is contained. I don't think it's big. I think it's small. It's a box set. The idea is to mirror it off of the original Traveler box set, 3 or 4 books. And if people like it, I'll do a couple more kind of supplemental rule books that really look into things in detail. And I worked on a name, and I came up with the name Earthcrawl. And the reason is because humanity is crawling back to the Earth to strip it of resources after basically a natural disaster of apocalyptic level circumstances, triggering a series of really bad decisions by humanity that end up with multiple nuclear exchanges and everything. And so the Earth becomes uninhabitable. And but there's about 10,000 colonists sitting on orbiting space stations when this happens, and none of them are affected. And so they have to figure out how to carry on, how to survive, and maybe how to thrive, right? And so I'm like, I want all the space adventures, all this cool stuff that you could do in space games. They're like thousands of years in the future. Dune, 10,000 years in the future. Space Master, at least 10,000 years in the future, right? Anything that you really go into space other than like Cyberpunk, which had some 2050 and 2077 stuff. But most of the space games, what is it? Not Pathfinder, but Space Finder or whatever it is. Starfinder. Thank you. That's, a totally fictional world, right? But realistically, Star Trek, thousands of years or hundreds of years in the future. Star Wars, 10,000 years in the future, right? And stuff. So all of these things are really advanced. They have fusion drives and warp and all hyperspace and all this stuff. And I was like, what I really, really like? I like space today, right? Limited, slow, cumbersome, hard to manipulate, lots of limitations on what you can do. You can't just jet from world and system to system. It's not Traveler, right? And I'm like, so if I set this 50 years in the future, say 2074, right? That's when the apocalypse happens. That's when this and I base it around the idea of the Yellowstone supervolcano. I don't know if you know about the Yellowstone supervolcano.
I do.
But it turns out NOAA, National Aeronautics and Space and Oceanographic Administration, right? NOAA, I just butchered that acronym, but that's basically it. They've done projections on what this could look like, and it is a United States ending event.
Yeah, because it would be like a nuclear winter, basically.
It would be a nuclear winter worldwide, but they're talking about up to 3 foot of ash in Buffalo.
Wow.
Right? If the supervolcano goes under Yellowstone, you're going to lose 10 states immediately within hours. They will just go dark. And then I started looking at it. So I was like, oh, this is kind of intriguing. So I started looking at air traffic patterns. And I'm like, there are like 8,000 aircraft that travel over the epicenter of the supervolcano daily. Right? So all of those choked with debris, crashing into what is now super hot volcanic ash fields. This is just an apocalyptic event. You lose the United States, you lose entire states instantaneously. You could basically predict that the federal government will mostly collapse. And this is not far-fetched. As a matter of fact, the United States has known this for 50, 60 years, right? There are studies and more studies and books written, white papers for the federal government that specifically detail the fallouts of nuclear war, of how chemical and biological and radiation will affect mass populations. All of this stuff is done, right? They kind of have this knowledge. And so I started reading these books and these papers and everything. What I do is research, and it's kind of fun. And I'm like, this is just absolutely phenomenal. This is the nuclear winter. This is Damnation Alley. This is like all these movies that we watched in the 70s and 80s, right? They are really predicting what we're talking about. It's like suddenly I got really excited about this setting, and I'm like, well, so I don't want to have it just post-apocalyptic. I want to have it maybe 200 years later, where you have these kind of mega colonies, and we have the technology to build them with 3D beam printing and stuff. So the point of Earthcrawl is it is science fact. I mentioned that. I spend a huge amount of time reading about the science of space travel, the science of new engineering techniques, the science of all this stuff, and then projecting what that will look like. And that is a little bit of a fiction, but only 20 to 50 years in advance, right? I'm not going way out there. I'm just saying, how does 3D printing reshape the United States, the world economy? What does it look like? What are they telling us it's going to look like? It's not just me hypothesizing, right? It's other people who are more informed than I am, hypothesizing. And I'm using that data. So that's Earthcrawl. It's 200 years in the future. It has 7 mega arc colonies, which are these big, kind of cylindrical mega colonies that have they're 10 to 20 kilometers long. They rotate, so they have an artificial gravity, because you really can't subsist without an artificial gravity. You can't have children. You can't give birth. There's lots of limitations. And so I wanted those limitations to feel real in this setting. I wanted them to be part of the setting. If space is not a problem for you, if you can vector around in space and you're not worried about all these problems, then it's not really space, right? It's just an extension of the atmosphere. And it becomes incredibly far-fetched. And so, yeah. So the idea is that it's still, you need a whole bunch of resources to do this. And while we've now found that the moon probably has enough water to subsist our population for 200 years, right? Potentially under the surface of the moon. They just announced about a month or two ago, Mars likely has the same thing.
Yeah.
Certain chemicals or certain substances become really important, like diamond. They just announced that the surface of Mercury is 10 miles of diamond, right? The entire surface of the planet is encased in diamond. And so you start looking at this stuff and you're like, well, that's cool, but how expensive it is to go to Mercury and come back? Well, it's really expensive. It's far cheaper to go to the surface of the planet and come back, right? Because you're orbiting around it. And so that means that you have this class of people called Earth crawlers, right? That's where the title comes from, who have to go back to the surface and scavenge it for stuff. And originally it was envisioned as like Indiana Jones, with dystopian future, post-apocalyptic type stuff, right? And so that's, in a nutshell, that's Earthcrawl. Now there's a whole bunch more that I could talk about. We don't have the time to do it all.
Well, see, that gives us a perfect excuse to have you back on.
That's right.
And do another episode just on Earthcrawl.
That's right. And so the idea was that I would fuse Dungeon Crawl Classics and Mutant Crawl Classics in whole, so that you could use both books together uninterrupted. You want to play a Manimal, you could play a Manimal. You want to play a Plantian, you could play a Plantian, right? We could use horizontal gene transfer, and that's what's going on, right? People need to be able to respire. They need to be able to change their metabolism. They need to be able to change the way they produce things. You suddenly need nitrogen fixing organelles in space if you're going to be there long term. And so people are experimenting on each other, injecting nitrogen fixing organelles, becoming more plant-like, right? Could I photosynthesize for food? If I'm in a rotating tube and the center of the tube is all lights, right? Could I just have chlorophyll, and maybe I don't move as fast and stuff, but I then produce my own energy, because everything in space is expensive. Water is expensive. Food's expensive. Oxygen is expensive. Protection from radiation is expensive. Now, our troposphere and everything gives us protection from radiation for the most part. We have plenty of oxygen on the planet. You don't have to pay for that right now, right? You can get food relatively easily, although there are billions of people starving, so not everybody can do that. So thinking about the limitations of the environment lead to a dynamic setting, and that's what Earthcrawl is an exploration of that concept. And I wanted to have, I wanted you to be able to play wizards and stuff like this. This is something that people ask me very early on. How could you have magic in the world and have it feel like it's still science fact? And my response is that there's a lot we don't know about science, about the world. Science doesn't know about the world. And 99% of the population believe in that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? We have no lack of faith on this planet in the magical, the mystical, and the unknown. That's not an issue. And so my real question to you is how could you not have it? Because those people up there off the planet, you better hope that they have to have something to cling to, right? And it's a dystopian type of future where you can easily learn a lot of things, because we're actually are getting better at teaching people advanced topics, right? And such. But that all comes at a price, and so it becomes almost like these little utopian cities at the turn of the Industrial Revolution, where you're going in and you're making wool, or you're making fabric, and you're living in a company town, and that's what our colony looks like. Looks like a company town, because who's in space at the end, at the moment of the apocalypse? Governments and corporations, right? Well,
as long as it's not Wayland Yutani, you're all set.
So I wanted to be able to do all that kind of stuff. I wanted, we wanted to take certain elements that I developed in Smoking Wyrm and bring them fully into the game as well. So Rituals are a thing, right? Combing through the ancient lost literature and finding different forms of the same type of thing and then comparing them. And, so that's where the math magician comes from. They're ritual spellcasters. I have one called the Canticleer, who is a ritual idol magic user, right? So it's a variant of the cleric, basically. You could still play a cleric. As a matter of fact, at my table in playtesting, that's what they're doing right now. But there's also you go throwing a fireball around in the middle of a colony, and you're going to probably get yourself killed, right?
Yeah.
Because
Fireball.
Oxygen combusts, right?
Yeah.
They're going to find a way to kill you. So it also creates a setting that has personal responsibility at its core.
Right. I was going to say boundaries, but you worded it better.
Yeah. So that and there's marginalization, right? There is essentially corporate slavery or indentured servitude and stuff. So you can sell yourself to get benefits and everything. And as a matter of fact, I pulled off of Nick Barron's standard setting the idea of hunger and debt, and use those integrally in the game, and everything. So as you depending on your occupation, you may have more or less debt, because being a doctor requires a lot more training, which means there's a lot more investiture from the government or society in getting you there than if you're just corporate administrative assistant.
Right.
And so it turns out that many, but they need those high skilled jobs. Nobody in space is unskilled, right? So
that's just crazy. Well, thank you for the nightmare fuel about the super volcano.
Well, I'm really glad that you signed on for the Patreon, because you'll be able to go back. I think I've got about 62 posts now, and you'll be able to go back all the way to the very beginning and read through it. And I saw that I actually had seen that you had signed up, because it notifies me. So you signed up at the level where you get physical rewards. So you'll be getting on a monthly basis, approximately. I'm waiting for art. So all the money in the Patreon goes to funding art that I then use in the little publications. So I have class guides, a la standard, so these classes, as I'm developing them, come out as a little zine that I hand assemble and number and everything. And they go out, I think you're five or six people actually get physical copies right now. And
how could you not want physical copies?
Right.
I've already got it in my head. I've got to go buy a new box of sheet protectors so that I can keep track of all this, so that in, say, 2 or 3 years, when you launch this as a box set, like you were saying, that I can go back and look at my perfectly preserved sheet from of August 2024 and look at it and compare it to what made the cut. That'll be so cool.
And that's part of it is these are test classes. These are I did an entire publication on drugs. So we have a very complete type of drug use thing. So stimulant drugs, or I wanted to that's part of the dystopian future, is this reliance on chemicals and everything, and then kind of weeding in some cool supernatural elements into it and stuff. And so there's whole rules for, I'm going to take this drug and it's got primary effects and side effects and everything. You make savings throws against the side effects, and the primary effects are variable depending on people's different metabolisms. They take longer or shorter before it fully metabolizes and everything. And all that's really easy to work out in a little drug stat block, right? And just like a little monster, which basically what drugs
are.
And so there's lots of cool things that I've been working on for Earthcrawl. And the great thing about the Patreon is that people can respond, and they can tell me what they like and can tell me what they don't like. And they can try and they can talk me down when I go too far, and they can say, oh, that's a great idea. Many patrons will read something and they'll say, this is awesome. Have you read this book? And then I'll go read the book, and I'm like, oh my God, that's nightmare fuel, right?
Yeah.
So I've probably read about 30 or 40 dystopian future post-apocalyptic books this year. About half of those were from recommendations from my patrons.
And you no longer sleep. And
well, yeah, but I then pour that back into the setting. And so, yeah,
Right, because there's always that little kernel that you can pull and be like, "Ooh,
absolutely.
this would be perfect."
So we have, I think when when this goes, I pushed it back a year. I was going to release it next year, but I think it'll be perfected by 2026, the base thing, and it'll be very different. This is going to be a fairly unique setting. It'll come in a box set, something like this, but thicker. I think it'll be like a 2-inch box set, so that as I do supplements, you can just layer them right in. And then each adventure will be its own box set, and it'll come with props. They'll come with sensory cue cards. We're going all in on the sensory cue card system, and everything. So yeah, there's lots of cool things. As a matter of fact, I'm waiting right now to get the last of the art done for the funnel adventure that I wrote, the initial adventure that I wrote, which is called Scrap Metal. And almost all the art's done. As soon as I finish Smoking Wyrm Monograph 2.1, Krampus comes to Kostboderham. This is a mock-up of it. But as soon as I finish this and get it out to backers, then I will turn around and put a whole bunch of time into working on this first adventure, because building mock-ups and playtests helps me think about the way it's going to be designed and things I need to add into it and stuff. So that may actually end up being a Kickstarter or one of the Patreon rewards for a couple of months worth of reward. It'll be, I did 5 of these, scrap metal adventures with the cards and everything all built, so you can take it and play with it. So, so you can actually have, there's 2 occupation lists in there. You can be from the surface of the planet or from space, because some people did survive, although the space dwellers generally don't acknowledge that, because it dehumanizes anything you encounter on the planet. And so, yeah, so there's this underlying current of cultural revolution and rebellion, right? You really are marginalized by corporations and governments. It's not a great society.
Doesn't sound like it. And being in Maine, fortunately, I think I might have a chance at making it through the volcano going. But the question then is, do you want to?
Right. When everything's gone and society collapses temporarily back to a pre-industrial civilization, and then we could easily get back to essentially the technology of the 1940s and 50s without computers, if you had it right. And so I will eventually, the original idea for the adventures, by the way, was that you would be able to play them from both viewpoints, from a surface dweller or from the colonists. And you could either, go to the surface and then deal with something, or you could be on the surface repulsing some kind of attack, some kind of investigation or something. And
I love that idea.
It turns out that's really hard to write. And
yeah, so, I bet.
I haven't cracked that nut yet. But yeah, so I thought that was really cool. And I wanted to get a couple of standard adventures under my belt before we really push the envelope with that. So but this is a setting that's uniquely my own. It's uniquely both DCC and MCC, unapologetically. It makes use of a whole bunch of new narrative tools that I've been working on for years, and it is very grim, it's very dark, and it is bounded by fact, which I think is really nice, right?
If you say so, like I'm gonna play like one of these adventures and then just like love it, but then be like, oh, this is what we have to look forward to.
That's right. So there is the idea. There was a series of books that I read that are just phenomenal by a guy named Christopher Hines, called Liege Killer. They were originally called the Paratois Trilogy. Liege Killer came out first, and a couple years later he put out the second 2. And that book was very similar. It was a huge inspiration for Earthcrawl. It had orbiting colonies and everything, but it also had pirates. And so there will be this kind of rebellious nature to it. You'll be able to eventually play pirates as well. As a matter of fact, many starting occupations are pirates.
Very neat.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love a good pirate adventure?
The cool thing about the pirates is we wrote them so that you're a pirate, yes, but that means you have to have another occupation on top of it. Oh, Brian's read those. Those are great. Yeah, they're some of my favorite books. And
Did
so
you
if you're
say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but did you say liege killer?
Liege
Like
Killer,
Liege?
yeah, Liege Killer
Okay.
by Christopher Hines.
All right.
Matter of
I'll
fact,
have to write that
any,
down because I'm
anything
going to be
he,
hitting Amazon and then your Patreon after
yeah,
we're done tonight.
anything Christopher Hines has written is worth reading. I have to say that. And he even did a Liege Killer comic book with DC.
Hmm.
Wasn't called Liege Killer. I think it was. I can't remember what it was called. Oh, it's kind of like at the tip of my brain. I bought the entire 12-issue run, um, and they recently updated all 3 novels. He went back and they asked him to do hardbacks. One of the publishing printing house, and so he went back and kind of updated for the advances in technology because these were written in the 80s, and kind of updated. Not much changed, but it was amazing that he did a little facelift for all 3 books. So yeah.
You know what you've made me want to do tonight, first and foremost, is go through all my 3D files that I have and find everyone that I have that could possibly help in the downfall of humanity, put them on one thumb drive and like bury it in my backyard in a
In a box
mason
of
jar.
lead, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, yeah, so I will fully explore the societies in these. The initial books will just have a nice overview, kind of like a Greyhawk glossary or the gazetteer, and then hopefully I'll do books that talk about each colony ship and everything and stuff. Oh, but I was talking about pirates. Pirates are cool in the occupation list. If you roll up a pirate, you have to re-roll a second occupation, because just because you're a pirate, that's not the only thing you do. You're a pirate who is a pilot, or you're a pirate who's also a dentist, right? Because pirates have occupations too. And so yeah, so there's the occupation lists. You'll get. I've posted those to the Patreon. Go look at them because there's about 170 occupations in the orbital colonists occupation list. There are subcategories and everything. It's like, oh, I'm an engineer, but what type of engineer? All those things are, I've really done a lot of work on this. It's a pretty nice,
I can tell.
fun thing. And even though it's still kind of bare bones, I think I have about 2/3 of the first 3 books written. They're essentially about the length of a issue of the Smoking Wyrm each.
Okay.
And there's a player's guide, there's an equipment guide, and there's a judge's guide. And then there will be a little starting adventure, which I think will be called San Dimas Magician, and so that'll be the little starting adventure, and that'll be in the main box, plus cards and things like this to go with the adventure and everything, because it'll have, like I said, full sensory cues.
Right.
So
wow, I can't wait, man. You've
yeah.
got me so excited for this just from like 20 minutes of us talking about it. I can't. You're going to get bombed with questions from me after I really dig into that Patreon.
Well, I got to tell you, please do. Please, if you're a Patreon supporter, do not feel intimidated by what I'm writing, even though it may look polished and finished. It is just rough notes. And so, get in there, tell me the things you don't like, tell me the things you think are great, and everything, and really tear apart those character classes, because there's plenty of time to improve upon them, to play test them and stuff. I think most of the Patreons who are a paid member, our patrons who are paid members, will have enough to start playing Earthcrawl in like January of the new year.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I can't wait. So I hopped in at just the right time.
You did.
Nice. Oh, well, all right, my friend. I think that covers everything I had on my end. Is there anything you feel like we missed? And I will also make sure there's a link to the Patreon in the description.
Oh, thank you.
So that we can get you more folks on there.
No, I don't think so. There is a free membership level. That's important to know. So you can dip your toes in the water before you buy. But that'll only get you
Dip your toes in the ash.
In the ash, right? That'll only get you about a third of the posts and stuff. So yeah, I think that's about it, man. We have been super busy. Right now, I am like I said, I'm neck deep in building the cards for these, and they're all going to be handmade here at home. I have templates that I've made, dies that are really accurate. They cut to within a 16th to a 32nd of an inch of where I need it to cut, And so, in all printing and especially all die cutting, there's a little bit of slop, right?
Right.
We call it a bleed margin. And so these seem to be very consistently churning out the same pattern, which makes me feel really confident that we're going to get good cards. And yeah, that liberates me to do some things that I haven't been able to do. And
awesome. Well, I look forward to everything.
well, thank you.
And one last thing before I let you go, why don't you tell folks where else they can find you besides the Patreon and on?
You can find me on Facebook, right? Tales from the Smoking Wyrm. Just look it up, and it has a Facebook page. I lurk and chat in the DCC Rocks Facebook page frequently, and you can also find us at smokingwyrm.com, and that's worm with a Y. And so if you go to smokingwyrm.com, it's a little out of date, but there's a lot of material there that you can find, including some free creatures. And a free troll, I think a troll character sheet, if I remember correctly. Or maybe that was the Beastmaster. One of them is up there free that you can just download and print whenever you want.
And I will put a link to that down there as well.
Yeah.
Sure we can steer some folks there.
I have an Instagram account, but I think I've used it about 3 times, so it's unlikely you'll find me there. So yeah, I mean, I only have so much bandwidth. There's only so much I can so much social media that I have time to pay attention to. So that is a limitation. But you can always email me directly, trevor@smokingwyrm.com. And so send me an email. That's a perfectly good way to get a hold of me as well.
All right. Well, Trevor, thank you so much. And Brian, thank you for being a part of the conversation with us tonight.
Yeah.
And yeah, folks, other than that, have a great evening. Well, which way does my hand go? I always get confused with that. And we will catch you next time. And if you enjoyed the show, give it a thumbs up. And other than that, have a great night, folks. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.